of Tafshin Pei Vav, live in Efrat. Looking forward to another great week filled with a great Torah from the Zera Shimshon. This week was dedicated L'inu Shmat, my father, Rav Avraham ben Eliezer, whose Yortzeit will be coming up in a few weeks, as well as to the Hatzlacha and success for all those who need it, all those people watching this year and everyone else. Bezrat Hashem, we should see Yeshuot and the promises of the Zera Shimshon coming true in speedily, and everyone needs to get should get their Yeshuot in the right time. In this week's Parshat Noach, we know that this is where Hashem decides to to punish the generation with the Mabul, with the flood. And the psukim in the beginning of this week's Parsha are filled with questions. The Zera Shimshon begins with the famous question as to whether Noach, it says, Ela Todot Noach ish tzaddik by Tamim Hayab Dorotav. The question is whether was Noach a tzaddik in his generation, or was he a tzaddik in other generations as well. But before we go into the question as to whether he was a tzaddik in other generations or was he only in his generation, the Zera Shimshon has a question based on a few midrashim, and this is in Drush 2. In Drush 2, and there we have this question of whether Noach took responsibility or didn't take responsibility for the actions of the people in his generation. And that might also answer the question as to whether he was a tzaddik or not, or how we understand that argument. So in Drush Bet of this week's Parsha, it starts off, the question is whether, why didn't Noach warn his generation, right? Also a famous question as to whether what was going on that Noach didn't do anything. Midrash, he quotes the Midrash Rabbah, and it says, Ela toldot Noach ish tzaddik tamim. Kol ma'emei 20 shana haya notei arazim mekatzetzan v'amrim leim lama kedein. Right, so for the whole 120 years that Noach was involved in prior to the Mabul, Noach was busy planting trees and then also taking them down, cutting them down, and making sure that the wood was ready for building the teva, the ark. And people were asking Noach, "What are you doing?" A good question. And so he says, Amar Lahon, he would say to them, Kach Amar Maridialma, that the person, Hashem, the Maridialma is the Hashem, the in charge, Udehu Maiti Mabula Alama. And he was going to bring that, he's saying that basically Noach was telling the people of his generation that Hashem is saying that he's going to bring a Mabula, flood. Amru, Iata Mabula lo ata al beta dahai gabra. So the people were telling Noach, if there really is coming a flood, then it will come only on the person who's building the teva. Meaning, Noach, it should be coming on you and your household. Ad kan l'shano. Right. So the question is obvious: is what is this going on? Why are the people of that generation telling Noach that he's responsible, that the punishment should go on him? Right? Are they not taking any responsibility for their actions? So he continues. The Zera Shimshon asks, Taha dvarim ha'ele ein lam shachar. These words seem to have no substance. Ha'ech yamru dvarim ka'ele b'asher hema yadush avru mitzvot. Right? Obvious question. How could it be that the other people, the people of that generation, did they take no responsibility? How could it be? Did they not know that their averot were that bad? I mean, it's obvious that they were doing things that were wrong. So how could it be that they said that the flood should fall on Noach and his family and no one else? And they were clearly, it says, the Psukim say that they deserve punishment. Noach ish tzaddik. Noach was the one who was, the Psukim say he was a tzaddik. So how could it be that the people of that generation saying Noach, the Mabul should only, the flood should only come on, the flood should only go on you and your family as opposed to them, meaning they're trying to shirk away their responsibility. Madua iyate mabula yavol Noach ve'al banav. Right. So the question is, how could it be, or why would it be that the Mabul, the flood, would come on them, on Noach and his family, if Noach and his family were the ones that were doing the right thing? It couldn't be. We can't take it the other way. How could it be that they're turning the tables? The people of that generation are turning the tables on Noach. The Ita V'Zohar. So we Lomar the Ita V'Zohar the Parsha Zo. In order to start his answer, Zera Shimshon starts by discussing something about or quotes the Zohar that around a certain component of Noach, and then he'll introduce his answer. So it says Ita B'Zohar Parsha Zo. In this week's Parsha, in the Zohar, the Zohar Kodesh mentions in this week's Parsha, Shenoach Chata Shelo Yitpalel Doro. Noach failed. He forgot to pray for daven for his generation. He didn't say anything. Nowhere do we see that Noach actually said, "Hey God, if you're going to give a mabula, a flood, and punish the generation, what can I do to stop it or reduce or minimize the punishment?" Moshe, as Moshe did, right? We know that Moshe, as soon as Bnei Israel sinned with the Egel Azav, with the golden calf, Moshe got up and said, "Hashem, this isn't fair." And the Zohar continues and says that because Noach didn't take responsibility and even try to, present or at least prevent some sort of, either present an argument or at least prevent some sort of punishment. So the Mabul is always called, and we read in this week's Haftorah, it says, Ki mei Noach zotli. So Noach gets named as the flood of Noach, meaning that he will forever be known that the Noach was that the flood was in his generation. Aval, even there is also another place that said later on in the Zohar, it says that Noach, that defends Noach. It says Shemoshe yalos chutavot litlot bo. Right, Moshe. Maybe the Zohar continues and says maybe the difference between Noach and Moshe is that Moshe was able to say, "Hey, zechut avot," right? He had other people to learn from, and therefore you could say, okay, so Moshe knew how to tap into Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Yosef, all the different people prior to him who came all the different Jews from different generations, that he could say on behalf of them, Hashem, please stop the punishment. And the Zohar continues and says, but Noach didn't have anyone. That's a good answer to say why he maybe didn't daven at all, but he should have done something, right? He should have said, hey, I hear that there's a Mabul coming, I should take some responsibility, and the Zera Shimshon will ask that question shortly. But either way, what the Zera Shimshon is setting up is that according to the Zohar, either Noach was punished because he didn't take responsibility or daven on behalf of the generation, or unlike Moshe, who had some sort of history or context from the previous generations of what to do. Even so, Noach takes no responsibility, and therefore he gets punished by his punishment is that the flood will forever be called Mei Noach. Imkain. Now that we understand with that introduction, now we can understand what was going on. Imkain yesh lomar shedorosh Noach hayu sovrim shenoach haya lo litpalel lehem shelo yovdu v'ata sheno mitpalel v'adarabba oseh teva lagen alav ve'no chashuv klum im yu nevadim ra'uhu lamut levado v'chol ha'olam yinatzol. So an interesting take on the midrash that we started off with, that his generation said, wait a minute, Noach, don't you realize? Wake up. Noach, don't you realize you're building a teva for the world is about to be destroyed? Don't you think you should do something about it? God chose you, and if God chose you to be saved, don't you think you have an opportunity here? And they thought, this is what their thinking was, the Zera Shimshon is putting, kind of placing what's going on in their mind. Their mind is saying wait a minute, he's the leader, he's the person that God is speaking to, so that he's the one who should be doing something on our behalf. And since he's being selfish and not doing something for us, he's the one who should get punished, not us, right? If the leader is not realizing that there's an opportunity for him to do something on behalf of those around him the world is being destroyed, then it's not. Then he's not. The questions either he questions his leadership, or he deserves the punishment more than anyone else, because whatever wrongdoings they did, it's not as bad as a leader who has an opportunity to do something and doesn't do it. And therefore he says, right? Vodam rinan bizman shatzibur sharui betzar al yamar adam elech levitir shalom alech nafshi. Right? And so the Zera Shimshon brings two examples, classic examples of people who were told, or leaders or situations in which a person was put into a place of trouble or a place of difficulty. And in both cases, the person did stand up and took the responsibility in their hands. One is the classic one of Mordechai and Esther, where Esther is told by Mordechai, if you remain silent here, this is your opportunity, this is your moment. Don't remain silent. And if you do, then that's fine. You'll go down in history as being someone who missed the opportunity. And it'll come from another place. While you and your father, and your history of the whole generation will get destroyed, the salvation will come from somewhere else. Basically saying this is the opportunity of a lifetime. Esther, don't mess it up. Right. So that's the first one. And the second one is in the Masechet Ta'anit. It says, the Chachamim say that a person, if there's a person and a family and a community that are in trouble, and that person from the community says, "Oh, well, I'm not in trouble. I'm not going to be punished." He can't go into his house and lock his door and say, I don't really care about what's going on with them. I'm okay, and therefore I don't need to daven or be part of that community that's going through some sort of difficult time." Meaning, you can't take away yourself. You can't take away. You remove yourself from the community. In both cases, it's a situation that's difficult, and every person has to view themselves. In Esther's case, Mordechai tells her straight out, "You have to take the responsibility in your own hands." And the other case, in the case of Ta'anit, in the case of when there's a famine or a bad situation going on, in that case, the person can't do he's not allowed to just say, "Well, everyone else is being punished. I'm going to lock my door and stay and kind of fold and sit on the side." No, v'masaken, and if he does do that, lo yireh b'nachmat tzibur, he will not see he will not see the community, meaning he won't merit to see the community come out or emerge victorious. Why? Because he decided to sit on his laurels and decide to fold sit at home and close his eyes to what's going on around him. So in both cases, one case, Mordechai tells Esther that she has to do something, and if she doesn't, she'll go down in history as the person who missed the opportunity. And in the case of Ta'anit, the Masechet Ta'anit and Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, there the Gemara says that a person is not allowed to do it, and if he does it, he will miss the opportunity to see the community emerge victorious and see their salvation. When we call Shekain, so now he says another may have had a point, and especially in this case. So he says that Mikol Shekain Hacha, certainly in this case, the case of Noach, Shu Haya Yachol Yitpalel V'lo Yitpalel Harei Ze Domeh L'Misheh Yachol Limchot Ve'ino Mocheh. Right, so it says, especially in this case of Noach, who had the opportunity to daven. Right, Hashem tells him, "Noach, I'm going to destroy the world." And then he says, "Noach, build this teva." So in Noach's closed-mindedness, instead of saying, what can I do to save, he should have davened and said, "God, I don't want this to happen." Or if he doesn't know what to do means to daven, he should have said, "God, what's going on?" He should have said something. He didn't say anything. He just followed instructions. And instead of taking one step back and saying, "Wait a minute, what's going on here?" he just followed God's instructions, which there might be a value to that too. But in this case, he should have said something. He should have at least protested, right, at the actions of if nothing else, he should have told the people who are doing wrong and saying, it's your fault that we're doing it, what's going on, and it's your fault to wake up and do something about it. Even if he doesn't talk to God and say, daven to God and say, "God, don't do it," he should have said something to the people around him who were giving him a tough time. And therefore, he is faulted even for the wrongdoing of the community, meaning because Noach didn't do anything on either direction. Whether he should have talked to God and asked for nechama and shuva and asked for Hashem to reduce the punishment, or he should have talked to the people and said, "Guys, this is this is not right," and therefore he should have said and tried to improve their ways, or at least bring them towards seeing what they're doing is wrong. But in either case, he didn't do it, and therefore he's just as much as responsible for the punishment, and maybe even should be part of the punishment as well. Look, another example. So he brings two examples. We said Mordechai and Esther, where Mordechai tells Esther that she has to seize the opportunity, and the other case is the case of the community that's going through a tough time, and that person can't close the doors and can't just lock his door and say, it's not me, it's them. In both cases, there's similarities to Noach. In Noach, he should have taken the opportunity and said, he should have seized the opportunity and says, "I'm the person that God's talking to, so I should at least daven on their behalf." And if the flip side is, I'm not allowed to lock the door and keep my eyes closed to what's going on around me. Either way, I have no answer. So he says, the Kohen Gadol, look what happens with the Kohen Gadol, the Gemara and Kohen Gadol, the Gemara, in Makot, Daf Yud Aleph, says that what happens with an Ir Miklat? An Ir Miklat is when God forbid, someone murders someone by accident. The murderer can run to an Ir Miklat, or city of refuge, and wait for the Kohen Gadol to die, and then the Kohen Gadol, basically, once the Kohen Gadol dies, the person is let free, and he's no longer the family of the person that was killed can no longer take revenge. And the question is, why does the Kohen Gadol, we look at the Kohen Gadol, And it says, we say that the idea of the Mishnah and Makot says that the role of the Kohen Gadol plays in, why does the Kohen Gadol play such a critical role in the Galut and the redemption of the murderer who murdered by accident? He says that the Kohen Gadol should have taken better responsibility for the actions of his generation, right? Because the Kohen Gadol plays such a critical role and an important role in the health and the spiritual health of the community, and because he didn't daven hard enough to make sure that there shouldn't, even unintentional murder shouldn't happen, so he is the person that the unintentional murderer, the Horeg b'shogeg, goes to. He's the one they depend on to leave. I mean, everything surrounds a Kohen Gadol, and if we know that because he didn't pray for daven for his generation when he could have, and therefore what happens, because he should have davened, the Kohen should have davened for his generation, and he could have, and he didn't, or didn't do it correctly. So now he's part of that. He's part of the equation. He was in danger of dying unless right. He was directly in danger. Right. So therefore, what happens? The Mishnah there says the mothers of this Kohen Gadol would provide food and drink and clothing for these people, the people who are the Horeg b'shogeg, right? Those murderers. Why? So that they should daven, so that the Kohen Gadol doesn't die early. Meaning, it sounds the opposite. It's counterintuitive, right? So it says that according to one of the opinions, it seems like that Kohen Gadol would die unless the murderers whose future depended upon him prayed for him to live. So it's almost like they have the ability to make the decision, right? So in other words, the Kohen Gadol was the one responsible for setting up the scene in which they did that. These unintentional murders took place, and now the unintentional murderers who are sitting in the Ir Miklat and therefore are waiting for the Kohen Gadol to die, the mothers would then provide for them and say, "Please don't daven for my child to die early." So they have the ability to turn the situation entirely around. The Gemara there. So it seems like at least the premise is that the Kohen Gadol was expected to daven for his generation and prevent such things from happening. And since he didn't, he deserved to die, right? So now he's saying is that the people in the Ir Miklat have the opportunity and the potential to change the conversation, to change everything around and allow him to live. Mishum hachi, hayu meshivim lo ati mabula lo ati al beita adahu gavra. Now we understand. In this context, now we understand what's going on in this case. How could it be that the community and the generation of Noach are saying is if there was a flood, you deserve it. Why? Because they're the ones that he should have done something about it. He didn't do anything about it. Just like the Kohen Gadol should have davened even stronger and saying there should be no unintentional murders in my generation, and he didn't do it, or he didn't daven correctly with the right kavanah, with the right intent. And therefore, he deserves the punishment that he's going to get, which is that people are going to daven for him to die early, right? In other words, the mothers were trying to convince these people not to daven like that, but rather to say he should live a long, healthy life. And so the same thing here. Noach had the ability to daven for this generation, or at least to get involved and say, hey, you guys are doing what we're doing is wrong, and God told me that we're going to have a flood, and therefore, at very least, correct your ways or try to improve your ways. The fact that he didn't do anything, so yes, that generation is allowed, in some ways, has a good claim to Noach and say, Noach, if you're not going to help us, and you're going to stand on the side, and even though God spoke to you, and you're not doing anything about it, so that you deserve the mabul more than we do. Aval adayin kasheh, right? Now we still have a question, the big question that remains. Lama bemet lo hitpal Noach al bnei doro, right? How could it be that Noach, hearing from God, getting instructions, spending so many years building the thing, and not once did he ever think of the idea saying, hey, maybe I should jump in and maybe I should correct the ways or help them improve their ways, or let them see the fact that what's going on is not right, or tell them that God is about to do it, over the course of time. He said God is bringing them Mabul, so they're laughing at him, and he's not saying hey, this is being serious. How could it be, right? So he says, right? Even if we say that, unlike Moshe, who had zchut avot, we could say maybe even if we were to say that Noach didn't have what a base to work off of, a foundation like all the Avot and Moshe with the Egel HaZahav, even if we said that, it's not a good answer, right? Right? Even if he didn't have any zchut avot, he could have just said, God, don't do it, or God, what's going on? What can I, please God, don't do that. They may deserve punishment, but not like this. He could have said anything, but nothing has been said, and most midrashim, the midrashim that I saw, don't ever mention the fact that Noach said anything to God, saying, hey God, what's going on here? And therefore, as lo right, right? Even if his prayers, if his tefillot, Hashem would have said, God, Noach, I appreciate that you tried, but I'm already, my decision's been made. At least then you could say, okay, Noach tried. Okay, that teaches us something about how we have to daven, right? And we know that sometimes tefillot don't get answered, at least the way they don't get answered the way we think that they should get answered, right? But that doesn't mean they don't get answered, right? But here we don't even see that Noach tried, and that's the point here, is that he didn't try, and that's the problem. And now forever, it's known as Noach's Mabul. Why is it Noach Mabul? Because Noach didn't do anything about it. In contrast to what's going on in this situation, we see in this situation he didn't do anything. As the Chachamim say in the Masechet Brachot, Da'amar leYishayahu leChizkiyahu, in the case of in Brachot, Daf Yud Amud Aleph, Yishayahu tells Tzidkiyahu, right? In the case, Yishayahu tells Chizkiyahu that why did Chizkiyahu get punished? Because he failed to get married. And the answer in the Gemara there says is the Amar li right? There, Tzidkiyahu says, listen, I know, Chizkiyahu says to Yishayahu, I see what my children are going to be. My children are not going to be following the path of the Torah, and therefore I'm taking action in my own hands and saying I don't want. I know what's going to happen, and therefore I'm doing preventative. I'm taking one step ahead, and instead of me doing the right thing, what am I doing? I'm taking action into my own hands and I'm basically preventing the future generations of my children from being evil by not getting married at all, and therefore he gets punished. So the question is, even if Hashem won't listen to him, Noach should have said something, right? Why did he even fail to do that, right? So in other words, you're going to get punished, right? He wouldn't get punished as badly had Noach just said something, right? In this case, Yishayahu is telling Chizkiyahu that because he failed he failed, refused to get married because he saw the fact that his children were going to be wicked people, and that's not what's supposed to happen. God told you, He gives you a mitzvah to pruvu. What happens in 2 or 3 generations from now, that's not up to you to decide. You have an opportunity now to follow the Hashem's commandments, so you follow the commandments, and maybe between now and then you'll have some sort of positive influence. But you can't now say that I see what's going to happen in 20 years from now, and therefore he gets punished. And here Noach should have done what? He should have done something. He didn't do anything. Right? So if we look, why is there suggest that what the Zera Shimshon now offers a suggestion as to why maybe he not have had any valid reason to daven. So what does it say? The Gemara, the Midrash says that al pasuk kitovotena, in last week's parsha, the daughters of man were good. It says that the tovotena, and it says al hakol HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mari Chape, right? God is willing to be forgiving. God is willing to extend His mercy many, many generations, and for many of the sins, chutz v'niznut, except for immorality. Ve'efshar shemishum hachi lo yitpalel Noach alehem. Lefi sheikar kavanat hatfilah hu litpalel HaKadosh Baruch Hu sheyiskor tarachamim af lachar shenitmaleh sayatam. Right? So he says is that maybe perhaps Noach knew that one of the main way that God won't listen or extend His mercy and be compassionate is immorality. And when it maybe because he knew that the generation were guilty of immorality, as we know, right? Noach didn't do anything daven for. What are we asking for? Hashem, raise your mercy, increase your compassion for this generation or for the sin. And they didn't mean it this way, or show some sort of compassion, right? And why? Because we want Hashem to remember the rachamim, His compassion, His loving kindness, right? And slow down His anger, right? Even after the fact that they deserved the sin, and even after they did they really, did the sin in its full glory, Even so, let's try to reduce the punishment a little bit. Right? So he says maybe that beyond the fact that they were immoral in this generation and this community at the time of Noach, not only were they immoral, where you could say is okay, God detests that sin, and there's no rachamim to ask, right? Beyond the fact that they were immoral, above and beyond the immorality was that they stole, and there was thievery. So therefore, we have two things going on. It's not only were they immoral, they also had theft, and so therefore, since both sins are between man, both of which are sins, meaning both immorality and theft are sins, but between ben adam lechavero, and not tefillah inan moelas behem klal, right? Because what happens in that case, tefillah doesn't help. Tefillah is to Hashem, don't punish me for sins that they might have that we might have done between you and between God and man. But in this case, both situations, both sins, both averot are between man and man, and therefore the entire infrastructure is wrong and it's messed up. And Hashem is saying I can't. What is Noach going to do? Maybe we still have the question is Noach should have said something, but maybe what the Zera Shimshon is implying here is that he had no starting point, because the starting point is God, show some compassion. God's going to say they're not showing compassion to each other. How should I show compassion? And not only are they not showing compassion to each other, they've got two strikes against them, both strikes, right? So now maybe you could say they have that, if there's two strikes, not three strikes, so maybe maybe God should have, and Noach should have given them another chance. We don't know. The point is that Noach didn't even think that he had a good case or beginning of a case, maybe because he didn't have zchut avot to give him that understanding that even when you don't have a strong case, you should say something. He didn't do that, and therefore he had nothing to go with, and therefore he said he decided to remain silent. Not sure that it's the strongest argument, but I think the Zera Shimshon is trying to say is that we have an opportunity ourselves, is that when we see something that's not going right, we should have the opportunity to at least daven on their person's behalf. Maybe we can't give them rebuke and tell them that what they're doing is right or wrong because we're not at that level, but at least we should quietly daven for their benefit and say you help me get them, or help them get through this situation and help them emerge without being too much of a sin. Interestingly enough, in terms of sin and punishment, one of the things that the Tomer Devora, the Ramak, the Rav Moshe Cordovero says that embarrassment is being embarrassed by other people is very hard to accept. It's a tough pill to swallow. Embarrassment is a very tough pill to swallow. But he says that perhaps being told off by someone else is a better punishment. It's one of the ultimate punishments. Why? Because it doesn't involve any physical impact, right? It's not like that you're going to, God forbid, lose money or something like that. You're going to be embarrassed. It's going to hurt. It's going to sting. But interestingly enough, here in this case, Noach gets embarrassed. It maybe is put on the spot by his fellow generation, the members of his generation. And instead of saying wait a minute, maybe I should take this to heart, Noach doesn't do anything. But the point is that the idea here is that we should do something. We should have the impact. We should recognize that in a generation that we have the opportunity to daven for other people and to help them. Either we actively help them get closer to Hashem, and therefore they get closer, and therefore they do tshuva and prevent sin, or at the very least we should daven for their behalf and daven for the people of our generation to try to do tshuva. And during the time that when we daven for, right, we should have in mind not only for ourselves, we should have in mind people that we know and people of our generation, that Hashem should enlighten them to do tshuva. And as I said, embarrassment, and even though it hurts at the moment from being embarrassed by other people, being embarrassed by other people, or the embarrassment that it causes us during that moment, that is some sort of form of kapara that is probably the ultimate version of kapara, and because the fact that it impacts us, but around it's only us. In other words, it's how we view what's going on. And maybe we're embarrassed by what's going on, but what the flip side to that is when you do something l'shem shamayim, even if you embarrass yourself l'shem shamayim, meaning you go out of your comfort zone, you push yourself to do something, And in the case of Mordechai and Esther, where Esther went out of her comfort zone. And in the case of the person, instead of being locked in a door, says, wait, we should daven even harder. He goes out of his comfort zone. When you go out of your comfort zone for L'Shem Shamayim, that's when the bracha comes, the biggest bracha. So here, Noach didn't do that. Moshe went out of his comfort zone on behalf of Bnei Israel and said, look at the don't punish them, because what's going to happen? What are the generations going to say? And so, and he brings in and does something and says something about it, and he takes that moment and sees the moment. Same thing with Nachshon Abinadav when he jumps does something in Shem Shemaim. He jumps into the water, into the Yamsuf, right? And the same thing with Pinchas and Zimri, right? He jumps out of his comfort zone, right? The people who jump out of the comfort zone and do something bold, L'Shem Shemaim, and in the right context and the right mindset, those are the people that are rewarded. And Noach, unfortunately, gets punished for that same thing that he didn't do, and therefore we should take that into consideration moving forward. So that is the end of the first, the Drush number 2. It kind of stops in the middle there, and he goes through later on throughout this the rest of the Drush. Noach, the Zera Shimshon goes through various components and examples as to what he says here. The combination of the promise that Hashem made to Noach and everything else. But either way, and he makes the connection between Hashem's promise in the Nevuah that he made Noach he's li, right? Like the waters of Noach, he makes the promise there, and therefore he makes that connection as well. But the main part here is that Noach's responsibility that he should have taken. What is the opportunity for us to do something with Shem Shemaim, even if it means we go out of our comfort zone, or especially because we go out of our comfort zone? And when we have the opportunity to daven, when we are fortunate enough to daven, whatever way that means, we have the opportunity to daven, we should have in mind those people who should return and do some sort of tshuva, so that way we've done something and taken some sort of action as opposed to no action. Now we're going to go to we're going to go to Drush Daled. Drush Daled is a very good example of looking at the Psukim again and again, and we read the Psukim many, many times, the story of Noach many, many times, but we fail to see a very simple repetition, and even if we do notice it, we don't necessarily ask the question that should have emerged. It says, Vatishachayta Aretz Lefnei Elohim, right? Drush Daled in Parshat Noach. It says, right? It says, Vatishachet ha'aretz lefnei Elohim. And Vatishachet means that they're immoral, that we know that they're immoral. And then it says, Vatimalei ha'aretz chamas, in that same pasuk. Right? What does that mean? That Timalei ha'aretz chamas, Rashi says, is gezel, means it's thievery and theft. So now there's immorality and theft. Right? Then afterwards, there's no mention of the theft again. Right? And then we look at the psukim, a few psukim later, it says that Hashem saw that the generation was immoral, and therefore what happens, if we see that Hashem sees that generation was immoral, that means it sounds like after they said that the word, first it says, means that the world was immoral. That's the first pasuk. Then this continuation of that pasuk is that there was theft. Then a few psukim later it says that God saw, quote unquote, or God was aware of the fact that there was immorality. So it seems like if the repetition is that it's immorality, so immorality was the sin that was the cause of the punishment. Then later on, right after it says, right? Then it says Hashem tells to Noach that the world is being filled with theft, and therefore I'm done. My decision's been made. So, right, it seems like the opposite. Is it immorality? Is it the theft? Which one is it? Right? Right? He says, God says, I'm going to destroy the world. I'm going to destroy the world. Why? Because they were the ones who destroyed the world with being immoral. So which one is it? Basically, the Zera Shimshon is saying is these psukim repeat different. The order of the sins is unclear as to which one of them, immorality or theft. Both are bad, obviously. But which one is it that was the one that decided? That was the one that Hashem said, "This is the one that caused that made me make my final decision to destroy the world." Va'od kasher al divrei Rabbeinu Zal shamru kol makom shatam tzeznut under rolo musia ba'al olam v'horega tovim v'ra'im v'ken midin znut bilvad ayu chavim kliya va'od amru lo nechtam gizar dinam el al gezel shelechorahim sotrim zeh zeh. There are two midrashim, or two midrashim. One is in Bereshit Rabbah, which says when there is immorality, then bad things happen even to good people. Why? Because the people of that generation, even the good people, get punished because they didn't do anything about the generation that was doing things that were corrupt, right? Im Kain, right? Then we could say that maybe that was enough of a punishment. Just the immorality alone was that would to cause the sin of that generation. Right? And then you look at the Gemara in Sanhedrin, and at the end of Sanhedrin, it says, Lo nachtam gizar dinam el al gazel. Right? If you look at the Gemara at the end of Sanhedrin, it says that the reason that the generation of Ador Mabul was punished was because of theft. So which one is it? So that's what the Gemara, there are two Gemaras, or a Midrash and a Gemara contradicting each other, and we're not sure which one it is. Va'afal so the Zera Shimshon starts by saying is, even though Abal Yefei Torah al Pasuki Tivotena Katav Tivotena, right? She'ef Shali Hashev al Elu Shtei Agadot, right? The Baal Yefei Torah who lived in, his name was Shmuel Yafa Ashkenazi, and he lived in Turkey in right before the 16th century, and he says that these two Agadot, these two sources, are basically you're splitting hairs. They're both wrong. They're both things that are bad, and neither of them should exist. And starting to ask which one is worse is like I said, is like splitting hairs, right? They certainly disagree with each other. Mikol makom hechad dematzin l'midrash darshinan. Mikol shekein Rashi beperush hachumash yvishtehen. V'od kashi adadi krai lahadadi develav elu agadot nami. So he says, Yefei Torah says these two Agadot do indeed contradict each other, but there's no reason for us to start to figure out a way to do it. That's what the Yefei Torah says. Torah says. Zera Shimshon says, even if we can teach, that we should, right, in a case where these teachings in a way that maybe we can find a way that they do align with each other. And even if we took out these Agadot, even if we looked at and said, let's ignore these two contradictory statements, we look at the Psukim themselves tell us that there's a contradiction. So even if we were to not disregard these two Agadot, which seem to contradict each other, and there's no good answers to which one is worse, we still have the Psukim that still set us up for a question of which one is it? Is it the Hamas, which is theft, or is it which is immorality? So the Zera Shimshon he brings a question, an interesting point, which he does many times throughout his Perush on Chumash, and he tries to come up with he finds a unique midrash that kind of, in the conversation between Moshe and Hashem in various scenarios. In this case, he brings the scenario of the Hashem and Moshe with the Egel Azav, with the golden, and finds a way to kind of he's trying to mitigate the sin. By mitigating the sin, perhaps Hashem should also consider mitigating the punishment. And so he says like this. He says all of these questions that we have about the contradictory psukim can be answered what it says in Gemara in the fifth parak of Brachot and Daf Lamed Bet Amud Aleph. My v'di zahav. What does it mean when it says in the beginning of Sefer Dvarim it says v'di zahav? So di zahav, we know that Rashi mentions there. Di zahav is referring to Egel Azav. And he says, Amar Devei Rabbi Yana, the school of thought of Rabbi Yana says, Kach Amar Moshe Lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono Shel Olam B'Shvil Kesef Ezahav Sheishpat Lahem Yisrael Ad Shamlu Dai, Hu Garam She'asu La'egel. Right? So he says, what does it mean V'di Zahav? He plays on the word V'dai Zahav, meaning that the money, what caused the sin of the Egel Zahav? The money that you, God, gave them. Right? They said, we have so much money, and we don't know what to do with it, right? And he says, a lion does not make noise in a basket with straw, which is not the right straw. A lion is a carnivore, so when there's food that's not fit for him, he doesn't make noise, right? He only makes noise when there's meat, right, is only when the lion has meat and extra meat that he acts in a way that says and attacks other animals. When he sees a lot of meat, that's when he gets excited, right? When I see a lot of money, that's when Bnei Israel, or when Bnei Israel see a lot of money, they get excited and they do something wrong, right? And then Amar, because they had abundance of too much money. So who gave them the money? Hashem. So Moshe's kind of like saying, I don't want to say he's sticking it to Moshe. Moshe's kind of sticking it to Hashem, but he's kind of saying is, it's not that they did do something, they did everything, they were perfect. They weren't perfect. They made a mistake. But let's take a step back and say, how does this whole happen, right? And I'm Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, Mashallah Adam echad shayalo ben. Right? It's a person who gets a father who has a son. The father says, he bathes him, he gives him, he pampers him, he gives him good things. Right? He feeds him, he supports him, supplies him with food and water. He gives him a purse of gold and puts around his neck. Right? And he puts him in a house in the middle of a place of immorality. Right? What is it? Is it possible that son at some point is not gonna sin? Right? You're putting literally into the lion's den. Right? If that's the case, the same thing. Bnei Israel were filled with gold and silver. They were pampered. Right? They didn't have to worry about clothing. They didn't have to worry about protection. They didn't have to worry about food. Right? They have everything they need. So they can't be blamed for the sin of Chet HaEgel, because on the contrary, Hashem should take into consideration that maybe there's some sort of blame that he should blame himself. Kivyachol. Why? Because he gave them so much money that they have nothing to do. They've got all the money in the world. Amar Rabbi Shimon bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Shimon bar Nachmani says in Rabbi Yonatan, Minayin shechazar Kadosh Baruch Hu v'odal Moshe. Where do we know that? As it says later on, Shneimar v'chesed v'rbeti li v'zahav asu laval. Right? In the Hosea, it says that I gave them so much gold and silver that they turned it around and used it against me. Right? Hashem in some ways acknowledged the fact that perhaps there's some reasoning, there's some thought process, but the fact that maybe what I did is I gave them too much of a good thing, and therefore it came back to bite me. And it says, Afkan b'dor mabul, so too in the dor mabul. Alaznut, right? The same with regards to immorality. Hayu yucholim lashiv shechatu b'shvil rov hatova sheishpi alahem kadosh baruch hu. If we look in the case of the dor mabul, we see that the Bnei Israel sinned, or not Bnei Israel, the people of that generation sinned. Well, again, because they had so much of good things that Hashem gave them. What does that mean? In the last chapter of the last parak of Sanhedrin, it says, Dor ha-mabul lo nitga'u ela. They became so arrogant, right, because of the shefa and the bracha that Hashem gave them. Dor ha-mabul hiti iman hakadosh baruch hu me'in olam haba. In fact, it goes to the point where the Gemara says that they had a taste of olam haba. Meaning they were filled with bracha and they were filled with so much good things that they took it, right? They enjoyed that generation enjoyed so much good. It was filled that their houses were peaceful. They were secure. They had nothing to worry about. The Gemara goes on to illustrate all the different things that they had. And if you want to take a look at the Gemara there, it's unbelievable what they had. And so in some way, so then they may claim, that generation may say, listen, God, you want to punish them, but what did you do? You were involved in this too. Right? The Gemara, the pasuk in Hosea says, it was with their pasture they became sated, meaning they were so filled, they were so happy and haughty with what they had, they forgot Hashem, meaning that I gave them the reason to be so proud, so overly materialistic and haughty and proud of what they had, that it led them to sin, right? And it says that immorality comes from wine and fresh, and basically the wine and all these good things, all these luxuries cause us to be immoral. And especially in that generation, right? If we look in the last week's parsha, it says that Vayiru b'nei Elohim et b'nota Adam. So there's obviously a difference between b'nei Elohim and b'nota Adam, and the women of that generation were very beautiful. But you put the b'nei Elohim, even the b'nei Elohim who were supposed to be like God, even they sinned, right? So he says here is that these two malachim, these two people from God's that come from God, also sinned because why? Just as the people were excused for their sin because of the abundance of good, right? So too a person, and just like the young person who was put into a situation which was difficult, so too in the generation of Noach, you could say, listen, everyone was immoral. And why were they immoral? Because they had so much of a good thing, right? They were so pampered and they had so many good things that Me'in Olam Haba, as it says in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, they literally had a taste of Me'in Olam Haba. So if they have so much of a good thing, then they don't know what to do with themselves, and therefore they sin. Umnam b'zot tana, and now the Zera Shimshon says that claim is wrong. I'm going to disprove this entire claim, and he says, okay, so which they say, okay, maybe we could say that this immorality is not necessarily completely our fault. Okay, then maybe that would but he says, yes, you maybe can make that claim with the idea of immorality. You could say, listen, God, you gave me all this good and bracha, and because of that, I'm immoral. That's fine. But all of a sudden, what's the other thing? We have, the Pasuk says, and the order is, right, first it says that they were immoral, then there's theft, and then there's theft, and there's immorality. And we ask the question, which one is it? And now Zera Shimshon says, no, it's not one or the other, it's both. If you want to just say, if they had just the claim of immorality, maybe we could say, okay, that God gave them so much so they became immoral, and you could say, okay, I'll take away some of that. And that maybe is a good claim. But here, not only are they immoral with the stuff that God gave them, they're taking away from other people of the things that God gave them. So it's not even saying we appreciate the fact that God gave it to us. We're just being immoral with other people. We're being immoral. We're taking away from other people which God gave us. Meaning the whole entire premise is wrong. Meaning the culpability for their sin is based on theft. Since they were given a taste of the world to come, and they became haughty, then they had so much of a good thing. Now they have to take from someone else, right? Right? So the Zera Shimshon takes it one step further. He says, no, their whole mindset is wrong. Meaning they were doing it lahachis, meaning they were doing it despite all of this. Why were they stealing? Despite it. I have so much a good thing, I want to take from someone else. I want more of the good thing. I have so much of it, I want more of it. And instead of just being immoral, which is already bad, they decided that they're going to take away from the good that someone else is good, and therefore it shows you the mindset and the absolute distortion of what was going on in that generation. Not only were they immoral for the lack of appreciation of what they have, they're going to try to do is they're going to say, we want more of it, and therefore we're going to be immoral and mess up everything, the entire mind, the entire structure by doing what? By taking from other people. And therefore we can say that the punishment was secured or administered finally because of the robbery. Right? But their main punishment, the primary punishment, was mainly because of immorality. And had they not committed a robbery, at least they could have at least avoided punishment by claiming that their temptation was, in some way, it was too great. They had so much of it, they just couldn't control themselves. But the immorality was definitely the sin that was there. But the final sin, the straw that broke the camel's back was theft. Now we can understand the psukim in the beginning of this week's parsha. First, it says, that the world became corrupt in front of God. That their main offense was, it was their immorality. But that wasn't enough to make them, to convict them and give them a punishment, right? Because they could have easily excused their behavior, whatever that means. But then it says, right? Then they became filled with robbery and thievery. Right? Their excuse, their idea, their defense was discredited. And that's why it says God saw that the world has become corrupt through immorality, and He condemned them for destruction for that sin. Right? And then, so therefore, He says now we can understand how the psukim align. That first it was that they were immoral. And then you could say, okay, maybe if it was immoral, if there was only, quote unquote, only immoral, then maybe they would have a good claim. But then, not only were they immoral, there was also theft. And so therefore the theft and the stealing from one another, that shows not only was that they were immoral, that means that their mindset of a lack of appreciation of the good things that they have shows that they can't even use the claim of you put us into a situation, and therefore the punishment was this, the final decision comes from, and the punishment comes from the fact that there was immorality and theft, and therefore it's not one or the other. It's not 1 plus 1 equals 2. It's 1 plus 1 equals 3. One, and there's one of them that you could say maybe there's a one you could say is the immorality. The other one is the theft, but together. One immorality, they could have easily said you put us into a situation that was bad. But Hashem says, no, your thought process and your mindset and your defense is wrong. Because if you would have just said it's just you put me in a bad situation, why do you have to steal? And the fact that you did both, I have to do, not only do I have to punish you, I disregard your entire thought process and claim and show you that your thought process is wrong, and therefore they get punished. And therefore it reconciles the two situations that we say which one is which. It's not which one is which, it's both. And so much so that the both of them together create or even worse. And therefore we understand that and this is one example, and if you notice at the end, he finishes it with Vayen od lekamen Parshat Vayera al vanshes dom ra'im v'chataim, and there the Zera Shimshon there says that you have two sins. Again, punishment of reconcile two sins mentioned in connection to the punishment of the Dor Mabul. Same thing, right? They were wicked and sinful. What does that mean that they were wicked and chataim, ra'im v'chataim, that were wicked and sinful? There too, he kind of shows that it's not one or the other. It means that their entire mindset was corrupt, and therefore, even if they tried to claim one thing against the other, it shows that everything that they were doing is wrong. And also, not only there, and in other places, Zera Shimshon shows how the mindset of the generation that they thought was going to be right, that maybe they were doing something right or they couldn't control themselves or whatever it may be, their mindset was wrong. And since their whole mindset was wrong, he mentions it with the Mitzrim, he mentions it here, he mentions it with the Anshe Sodom, he mentions it later on with I think in Ammon and Moab at the end of Dvarim. He mentions it several times. He's saying is you can't claim that this generation has some sort of defense, because the defense that they're saying, he finds a way to disprove. Hashem finds a way to disprove that entire defense, and therefore says your whole mindset, everything that you're doing is wrong, and don't try to don't come up with excuses to say that this was you put me in this situation. Because if you only say that, that's fine. But then what about the other sins that you did? And so therefore we see that we have to respect and appreciate the bracha that we have, and maybe we can learn from the fact that we got punished or the generation of the Mabul got punished for not appreciating that which they had and with that which they were given, and the fact that they had a taste of Olam Haba, and they took advantage of it. And not only did they take it for granted, they took advantage of it by stealing from other people. We should learn from the fact that they were punished what we could do, what kind of bracha we should have when we show appreciate what we'll get for showing appreciation for every moment and every time and every component of the things that we do have. And we could say, Hashem, thank you so much for those things. What kind of bracha we should get? And as they say, the Gemara says, mitoch lav mavin hein, right? Or you could also, or the other way around, mitoch hein mavin lav. Meaning from the good you can learn what's bad, and from the bad you can also learn what's the opposite, right? So here in this case we can learn that which the punishment, what was the cause of the punishment, taking advantage of or taking for granted the fact that Hashem gave us bracha and mein olam haba, and the fact that we took it for granted. Therefore we could say that and Hashem punished and wiped out the world not only for the fact that we took it for granted, we took advantage of it. We stole from other people, or not we, but the generation of Noach stole from other people. And therefore, mitoch lav, you can learn the hain. What's the lav? The lav is that we shouldn't steal, and the hain is we should appreciate for that which we have, and we should appreciate for what other people have, and we shouldn't take advantage of other people because we're trying to get an upper edge. Rather, the opposite. We should say, Hashem, thank you for what you've given us, and you've given me exactly what I need, and I appreciate it, and be happy for someone else's lot. And right, it says, you're not chalko, meaning someone else's. You should be happy with what Hashem gave you, and therefore we should learn that by recognizing Hashem's gift to us, by doing that and being more focused on that, will we be able to get more bracha from Hashem. Shabbat shalom.